The morning sky trembled. Something immense was building beyond the horizon. March 1944 brought terror to Berlin's doorstep. What happened that day changed everything. A battle so devastating it ripped the soul from Germany's air force. The Luftwaffe would never be the same. Picture this moment. Engines roaring across English airfields, hundreds of silver shapes lifting into dawn light. P-51 Mustangs climbing toward destiny. Each aircraft carried death in its wings. 6 machine guns per fighter. Enough ammunition to shred anything in the sky. But numbers told a darker story. From German bases, an even larger swarm was rising. 400 fighters clawing upward. Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs, piloted by desperate men. They knew their homeland was dying. Still, they flew. Radar screens across the Reich flickered with approaching doom. Dense clusters of signals pushing toward the capital. Air raid sirens shrieked across Berlin. Children ran for shelter. Adults stared at the sky with growing dread. At 20,000 feet, the air was thin and bitter cold. Oxygen masks frosted over. Hands went numb on control sticks. Hearts hammered against ribs despite the freezing altitude. American pilots had dreamed of this moment. A chance to prove their Mustangs could penetrate the Reich's heart. To show the world that daylight bombing could succeed. That the fortress of Germany had walls that could be broken. German voices crackled through radio static. Frantic reports. Position updates. The trap was being set. Every available fighter was climbing toward the approaching storm. Contrails began to streak the pale sky. White scars against blue infinity. Each trail marked a machine carrying a young man toward violence. Some would return home. Many would not. The distance between hunter and hunted shrank with every heartbeat. Gun switches flicked to fire. Safety catches released. The moment of collision rushed closer. Then the sky exploded into chaos. But this story begins much earlier than that March morning. Spring arrived in Europe like a hammer blow. 1944 brought thunder and fire instead of gentle warmth. Germany was no longer the predator stalking across Europe. Now it cowered under endless waves of bombers. The transformation had been brutal. Just 1 year before, American daylight raids seemed like suicide missions. B-17s and B-24s hurled themselves into German skies without proper escort. The Luftwaffe tore them to pieces. Schweinfurt became a graveyard. Regensburg echoed with the screams of burning men. Thousands of airmen died. Hundreds of bombers fell like broken birds. The lesson carved itself in blood and fire. Precision bombing could only work if the bombers had guardians. Fighters strong enough to break German claws. Fast enough to escort deep into the Reich. Deadly enough to clear the skies. For Germany, the situation twisted into nightmare. Their doctrine of swift air superiority had conquered Europe in 1939 and 1940. Messerschmitt Bf-109s ruled the skies from Poland to France. Even Britain trembled under their wings. The Focke-Wulf 190 added new fangs in 1941. Raw power and devastating firepower, but attrition was bleeding them white by 1944. Fuel grew scarce. Factories struggled under bombing. Veteran pilots died faster than rookies could replace them. The Reich's air defense shifted from confidence to desperation. Berlin became the ultimate symbol. If the capital could be defended, the world might believe Germany still had strength. If Berlin burned under daylight bombing, even true believers would feel defeat approaching. Across the English Channel, American resolve hardened into steel determination. The 8th Air Force believed daylight precision could win the war. Strike the factories, destroy the railways, burn the oil refineries, cut the arteries of German war production, But faith needed a weapon to make it possible. That weapon emerged from an unlikely source. The P-51 Mustang was born from British desperation. 1940 found the Royal Air Force bleeding pilots and planes. They needed fighters immediately. North American aviation offered an audacious proposal, a completely new aircraft, built from nothing, delivered faster than anyone thought possible. The early Mustang looked promising, but carried fatal flaws. The Allison engine choked at high altitude. Where European combat happened, above 20,000 feet, it couldn't breathe. British engineers performed surgery that changed everything. They ripped out the Allison, installed a Rolls-Royce Merlin. Suddenly, the Mustang was reborn as a predator. The new engine gave it speed that stunned everyone, climb rates that defied belief. Most importantly, range that stretched deep into Germany. It wasn't just another fighter anymore. It was salvation with wings. American pilots lined up to fly it. They spoke of its balance, its responsiveness, the way it danced with the slightest touch. 6 50-caliber machine guns provided firepower to shred anything. Above all, it carried the range that meant bombers wouldn't fly alone anymore. Germany clung to weapons forged in earlier victories. The Bf-109 had been stretched beyond its limits, modified until its frame screamed with stress. The Focke-Wulf 190 brought power, but demanded fuel and maintenance that the Reich couldn't provide. Every experienced pilot lost was a wound that wouldn't heal. Boys barely out of training climbed into cockpits that had already claimed too many lives. They faced an enemy now armed with one of history's finest fighters. German factories promised miracle weapons, jets, rockets, designs that would reverse the tide. But in March 1944, those remained dreams on drawing boards. The Reich's defenders still relied on their aging Messerschmitts and fuel-hungry Focke-Wulfs. Brave machines flown by desperate men, about to face something entirely new. A fighter that could escort bombers to Berlin and back, fight on equal terms, return home to fight again. Two stories grew in parallel. Germany stretching its remaining strength, America surging with industrial might. Each Mustang crossing the Atlantic carried a steel promise to men who had once felt abandoned. The stage was set. The Mustang was no longer theoretical. It was the answer. The Luftwaffe was no longer invincible. It was bleeding out. Both forces rushed toward collision over Berlin's sky. Not as theories or strategies, as flesh and blood, steel and fire. The reckoning was almost here. That cold March morning dawned over English airfields like any other. Frost sparkled on bomber wings lined up in endless rows. Ground crews moved through practiced rituals. Fuel hoses snaked between aircraft. Gun ports were checked and rechecked. In mess halls, young men forced down breakfast with red-rimmed eyes. Some cracked jokes to hide their fear. Others stared into coffee mugs, lost in thoughts of what lay ahead. Today's mission was different from all others. Berlin, the heart of Hitler's Reich. Not just another bombing run. A statement written in fire and steel. To strike Berlin in daylight meant proving Allied power could reach anywhere. Every man understood the stakes. They had watched formations shredded over previous targets, seen empty chairs appear overnight in briefing rooms. But now, the Mustangs promised something different. A chance to fight back instead of simply enduring. Hope wrapped in aluminum and engine oil, briefing rooms filled with cigarette smoke and tension, maps covered every wall, red lines slashing through Germany's heart. Commanders pointed to danger zones, rendezvous points, likely intercept routes. Their voices stayed steady, but everyone heard the weight beneath. The enemy would throw everything at Berlin's defense. Today would be written in fire and blood. Pilots walked to the flight line carrying parachutes like sacred bundles. Each Mustang gleamed despite the weak sunlight. Names painted on fuselages, pin-up girls, personal talismans. Men touched the metal skin like reassuring old friends. For many, their Mustang was the closest thing to family they had. Climbing into the cockpit felt like entering a steel womb. Strapping down, pulling the canopy closed, sealing themselves inside fate. Engines coughed to life, one by one, then roared together in mechanical symphony. The ground shook as hundreds of aircraft awakened. Sound waves crashed across the airfield like physical blows. Silver shapes lifted into pale sky. Wheels tucked away. Wings caught rising sunlight. From below, it looked like an endless river flowing eastward. A torrent nothing could stop. Bomber crews settled into familiar discomfort. Cold seeped through heavy suits within minutes. Frost formed on metal surfaces. Oxygen masks began freezing to skin. Men shifted uncomfortably, passing time with nervous chatter. They knew Germans were coming. Only questions were when and how many. Fighter pilots scanned endless blue horizons, eyes strained against distance. Every glint could be a wing. Every shadow might be death. Radio chatter stayed clipped and professional. Position checks, fuel reports, formation updates. Beneath calm voices lay knowledge they would soon be outnumbered. 262 against 400. Cruel odds. No choice but forward. German radar operators watched in disbelief. Dense signal clusters pushing toward the capital. Phones rang in command posts. Sirens wailed across cities. From airfields surrounding Berlin, the Luftwaffe stirred. Mechanics rushed fuel lines. Pilots grabbed flight gear with trembling hands. Bf-109s and FW-190s screamed upward. Fewer than before. Younger than before. Less experienced than their predecessors. But they carried national pride on their shoulders. The weight of a dying empire in their hands. American formations crossed deeper into the Reich. Tension wound tighter each mile. Bombers droned steadily forward. Shadows sliding over villages and forests. Mustangs wove protective patterns overhead. Contrails stitched white arcs across infinite blue. Every minute brought them closer to Berlin. Closer to collision both sides knew was inevitable. Two storms raced toward each other, hunters and hunted, young and desperate, determined and doomed. Boys in their 20s about to decide the fate of European skies, with steel, with fire, with courage that would echo through history. The sky fractured at 20,000 feet. Bombers thundered forward in disciplined formations. Their engines beat like the heart of some metal god. Around them, Mustangs prowled with deadly grace. From the east, darkness multiplied. 400 fighters surged upward like a steel plague. Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs diving with the sun behind them. Machine guns flashed orange. Tracers cut burning threads across pale blue infinity. The air transformed into chaos. American gunners swung turrets. Streams of fire arced toward diving shapes. Mustangs broke formation, split into killing spirals. The sky became a hurricane of violence. Engines screamed as planes twisted through contrails. One moment a Mustang pursued a German, guns blazing, 50 caliber rounds tearing metal apart. The next, a Bf-109 snapped around, cannons thundering, American wings shredding like paper. Parachutes bloomed like ghostly flowers. Others never opened. Radio frequencies filled with panic, clipped voices, desperate warnings, screams cut short by static. For every victory cry, silence followed. Sudden, absolute. A bomber exploded mid-air, frame breaking apart in a blossom of flame. Men tumbled out, some consumed instantly, others falling, arms and legs flailing against thin air. Survivors in nearby planes stared for heartbeats, then clenched teeth and looked forward. No time for mourning. Not here. Not now. Mustang pilots fought like men possessed. They rolled into German formations, machine guns spitting death. One Mustang slid behind a Focke-Wulf, riddled it until the engine burst. Black smoke trailed like spilled ink across heaven. But seconds later, another German was on his tail, forcing him into a desperate dive that rattled his airframe. No clear front lines existed, no safety anywhere. Everywhere was danger. Everywhere was death. Contrails twisted into knots high above, torn apart by diving fighters. At lower altitudes, crippled planes limped downward, trailing flames like falling stars. On the ground, civilians craned their necks, watching heavens devour themselves. Wing fragments rained down, pieces of fuselage, even bodies, falling into fields and forests, the debris of aerial apocalypse. Luftwaffe pilots pressed attacks wave after wave. Some were veterans, hands steady, eyes cold as winter sky. Others were boys, barely trained, thrown into the maelstrom. Their inexperience showed immediately. They dove too steeply, fired too wildly, became prey for Mustangs that counterattacked with ruthless precision. Still, Germans fought with desperation that stunned even their enemies. One Bf-109 slammed headlong into a bomber, its pilot choosing collision when guns jammed. The explosion lit the sky like a second sun. Survivors in parachutes swung helplessly, drifting through smoke and fire. Mustangs paid in blood, too. Engines seized without warning. Fuel tanks ignited in orange balls. Men who had joked over breakfast found themselves trapped in burning cockpits, fighting to unbuckle straps as flames consumed them. Some managed to bail out, drifting down into enemy territory. Others vanished in silence, their planes plunging earthward in fiery arcs. No time for prayers, no time for farewells. Hour after hour, the battle raged without mercy. Bombers pushed onward through the storm, each mile bought with lives. Their gunners blazed until barrels overheated, smoke filling cabins. Some aircraft staggered in formation with half their crews dead, controls failing, blood freezing on metal floors. But still, they flew. Still, they bombed. Duty stronger than fear. For the Luftwaffe, losses mounted beyond imagination. Each Mustang was a relentless predator, able to climb, dive, turn with deadly grace. Germans struck again and again, but with every attack, more of their number fell. The sky that had once been theirs was slipping away, like water through desperate fingers. By midday, the air was littered with burning wreckage. More than 100 German fighters had been torn from the sky. Dozens of Mustangs and bombers lay shattered on the ground below. The battlefield wasn't a field at all. It was heaven itself, an endless graveyard of smoke and twisted steel. Even amid carnage, moments of eerie beauty appeared. A Mustang and Messerschmitt locked in death spirals, circling each other until both vanished into clouds below. A bomber limping homeward. One wing shredded, its crew singing hoarsely over intercom to stave off fear. A young German pilot shot down, drifting in his parachute, staring at the burning sky with tears streaming down his face. This wasn't strategy anymore, wasn't doctrine. It was survival. Men clinging to life, hurling steel and fire in a contest without mercy. The clash above Berlin transcended mere battle. It was a reckoning of human will. When smoke began to thin, when surviving planes clawed out of the inferno, one truth was inescapable. The Luftwaffe had bled heavily. Americans had paid dearly. The sky itself bore permanent scars. The climax had passed, but echoes would thunder on. In the wreckage lay the broken wings of the Luftwaffe and the rising dominance of the Mustang. When gunfire's last echoes faded, Berlin's sky was no longer a battlefield. It had become a graveyard. Smoke drifted across the horizon like funeral shrouds. Contrails torn by violence now wandered aimlessly in the wind. Wreckage burned in fields and forests below, scattered across villages where terrified civilians had watched the battle unfold. The clash was finished. Its cost was staggering beyond measure. The Luftwaffe lost more than 100 fighters in a single day. Among them were veterans whose names had once inspired terror. Men who had flown since the early triumphs of 1939 and 1940. They were gone now, replaced by silence, leaving Germany's skies thinner than ever before. For every machine destroyed, more than steel vanished. Experience died. Irreplaceable skill perished. The fragile hope of holding the line crumbled. What remained was emptiness where eagles once soared. Americans counted their dead, too. Mustangs lay twisted in Saxon and Brandenburg fields, their proud wings broken like discarded toys. Bomber crews never saw England again. Final moments consumed by fire and falling metal. Some survivors floated down in parachutes, only to face capture in a war that still had months of fury ahead. Victory came at a price. Those who lived carried the weight of friends left behind. For Berlin itself, the raid was devastating. Bombs tore into rail yards with mechanical precision. Factories collapsed in avalanches of brick and steel. Supply lines snapped like overstressed cables. The capital was hammered with a message nobody could ignore. Nowhere was safe anymore. The image of an invincible Reich, shielded by the Luftwaffe, cracked visibly that day. If bombers could strike Berlin in daylight, escorted through swarms of German fighters, then the war's balance was shifting beyond denial. The fortress had walls that could be breached. Allied newspapers across the world hailed the mission as vindication. The Mustang was celebrated, its name spoken with awe in briefing rooms and pubs alike. American commanders declared the Luftwaffe had suffered a mortal wound, one from which it might never recover. In many ways, they were absolutely right. German factories still produced aircraft, but they couldn't manufacture seasoned pilots. The skies were being emptied of Germany's best. Once lost, they would not return. No training program could replace decades of combat experience. Inside the Reich, reaction was darker. Propaganda tried spinning the clash as heroic resistance, but truth was harder to hide. Families received telegrams. Airfields grew quiet. Hangars filled with wreckage instead of ready aircraft. Empty spaces marked where fighters once stood prepared for battle. For young recruits, the message was unmistakable. They wouldn't be joining a proud, invincible force. They would step into voids left by fallen men, climbing into cockpits that had already claimed too many lives, flying machines that death had touched repeatedly. Tactically, the mission achieved every goal. Bombers reached Berlin, dropped their loads with precision, returned home bloodied but unbroken. The daylight bombing doctrine had been proven in fire. Strategically, it marked a turning point. From this moment forward, American commanders knew German skies could be penetrated and defended, with force sufficient to shake the Reich to its foundations. It wasn't the end of the air war, but it was the beginning of the end for the Luftwaffe. the moment when supremacy shifted permanently. Men who flew that day would never forget. For some, it became a badge of honor, proof they had faced the enemy's worst and survived. For others, it was a scar, a memory of fire and screams that haunted their sleep, victory and tragedy interwoven, written in the same sky where boys became men or became nothing at all. The battle for Berlin's air transcended mere machine combat. It tested endurance, tested will, tested nations straining against limits of blood and steel. When it ended, the Luftwaffe was weaker. Americans were stronger. Berlin's people were shaken to their souls. The cost was terrible beyond words. But the message rang clear across Europe. The age of German air supremacy was finished. The day belonged to the Mustang, and the Mustang belonged to those brave enough to fly it. The battle over Berlin refused to fade into historical footnotes. It became a permanent marker in the timeline of aerial warfare. The day when power shifted irreversibly from east to west. From that March morning in 1944, the Luftwaffe's decline wasn't theoretical anymore. It was brutal reality carved in smoke and steel. Skies that once shielded Germany became corridors through which Allied bombers marched toward final victory. The Mustang emerged as more than mere machinery. It achieved legendary status. Range, speed, and firepower transformed daylight bombing from desperate gamble into strategy that crushed German industry. Railway networks crumbled. Oil reserves burned. The Reich's arteries were severed one by one. To bomber crews, silver Mustangs weaving overhead meant the difference between death and home. To German pilots, they represented nightmares with wings, symbols of an enemy that couldn't be outrun or outfought. The Luftwaffe never recovered from Berlin's bloody lesson. Factories continued building aircraft, but pilots were dying faster than training could replace them. By summer 1944, American bombers struck almost at will, their escorts dominating every altitude. The battle had shown the world that the Reich's shield was shattered. No miracle weapon could repair it. No wonder jets or rockets could restore what had been lost in a single day of savage combat. For men who lived through that aerial holocaust, memory carried both pride and deep sorrow. American veterans spoke of exhilaration, of proving themselves against overwhelming odds, of flying the finest fighter ever built. But they also spoke of empty chairs in mess halls afterward, of friends whose laughter was silenced forever, of nights when they woke screaming from dreams filled with burning cockpits and falling comrades. German survivors remembered the desperation, the impossible odds, the moment they realized their nation's skies no longer belonged to them. The bitter knowledge that all their training, all their courage, couldn't overcome industrial might, married to tactical brilliance. In history's grand ledger, the meaning runs profound. The clash of 262 Mustangs against 400 German fighters wasn't just arithmetic. It was the breaking point in a struggle that began when the Luftwaffe seemed untouchable. The moment when steel, fire, and raw courage rewrote the balance of war in Europe. When boys became legends or became memories. When the tide turned permanently westward. Today, when people see Mustang silhouettes, they witness more than rivets and engines. They see endurance embodied, innovation triumphant. The turning tide made manifest in aluminum and steel. The battle for Berlin's skies stands as eternal reminder. Wars aren't won by numbers alone, or machines alone, but by will to endure, to adapt, to strike when the critical moment arrives. Perhaps that's the true legacy of that single day in 1944. Not the wreckage that rained down like metal snow, not even victory itself, but the lesson that even history's fiercest storms can be broken. When courage takes wing, when determination meets opportunity, when young men climb into machines and write their names across the sky in fire and glory, the echoes of that battle still thunder across time, in every museum where a Mustang sits in silent testimony, in every cemetery where airmen sleep beneath simple stones, in every story told by those who remember when the sky itself caught fire, and the Mustang ruled supreme over the ruins of the Luftwaffe's dreams.